Hey everyone, this is Matt Wills with Defining Ethos. So, of course, we all know that Don Lemon was arrested this morning, and the mainstream media has been covering this wall to wall. And you know, on my channel, I have a strong focus on reading the language that's being used, so we're going to go over that. Now, why I'm laughing is because I've been watching the media cover this, and they can't decide whether this was a protest or documentation or intimidation of a church, and that confusion actually collapses the First Amendment distinction. So, over and over, you're going to hear two main things. This was just a protest. That's one. And number two is Don Lemon was just documenting, so he can't be liable. Liable for what? Because that doesn't make any sense. So, like, they keep trying to separate Don Lemon from the protesters because it wasn't a legal protest. So, let's start with the sneakiest one, Brian Stelter.
A disturbing escalation against reporting in America. And I would also put it in the framework of protests. You know, this is part of an ongoing pressure campaign against protests, especially the kind of provocative anti-Trump protest action that we have seen makes the administration so uncomfortable and frankly makes some voters very uncomfortable. This is an action, this arrest of Don Lemon, this arrest of this independent journalist who is live streaming and reporting in Minnesota. This is something that some MAGA loyalists have been demanding. They've been wanting to see it happen. When Trump promised retribution, this is the kind of retribution that some of his voters, not all, but some of his voters wanted to see. And I think that is, for better or for worse, some of the context for what we're seeing this morning. In this, the First Amendment is meant to protect both a reporter's right to report, but also a congregation's right to worship. So legal experts might say this is somewhat complicated, although Lemon said all along he was there as a reporter, not as an activist. And he did a really important job showing people, all of us now who can watch the video, what happened inside that church. I want to back up to that Sunday morning. That intrusion into City's church was sincerely shocking to many, many millions of Americans, and myself included. People, saw that video, they saw Lemon's video, and they were uncomfortable by what happened inside that church. The idea that worship service was disrupted by protesters. And now there's a very interesting debate about whether the protesters were right or they were wrong to go into the church. But that is a political debate, and that's a debate about what forms of protest are effective. The Trump administration is moving that political debate into the legal arena and wanting to take it into court.
So, of course, he starts with this is a war on protest. But what happened in that church was not protest, it was intimidation. Then he says Don Lemon said all along he wasn't there to protest, just to document. And you're going to hear this from the same media people. They're all saying the same thing. Don Lemon said he wasn't there to protest. Okay, he said so. Great. So whenever I'm part of a crime, I'm just going to say throughout that I'm not committing a crime, right? And then after that, that's where Stelter starts to get really sneaky. He starts appealing to the moderates by saying, people were shocked and we were uncomfortable. That way, people who did feel shocked or uncomfortable will start to align with what he's saying, so that when he starts considering this a political debate instead of a legal one, you'll be much more likely to follow him into that view. But here's the problem with that. This is a legal debate. What those protesters did was illegal. But let's say for a second that the protesters weren't intimidating at all. Say they came in, they didn't block off the exits, they didn't yell in people's faces, and they simply stood there and sang in protest nonviolently. One First Amendment right can't impede someone else's First Amendment right. Do they have the right to protest? Yes, but if they use the protest as the aggressors to come into a place of worship and stop it, now it's a crime. Same thing would apply in reverse. If the protesters were out on the sidewalk with signs protesting ICE legally, and the worshipers decided to come out and surround them, start moving them off the sidewalks, disrupting their protest, well, they can't do that either. Now let's see what TMZ has to say.
So the Trump administration wonders why people are saying that they are trying to form a dictatorship. Well, look at the landscape. Arresting Don Lemon, who covered a protest in Minneapolis,
Wasn't a protest.
is just insane, ridiculous, dictator-like. This is the playbook that dictators use to destroy democracies and take the will of the people away. It is as simple as that. The First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason. It is considered the preferred amendment when you have to start balancing what's more important. The idea that a journalist, which Don Lemon has been for 30 years, would walk into a church and film a demonstration which is of national interest, and then to say somehow, when you watch the video, they say he's part of the protest. Watch that video. He is covering the protest. The idea that the Justice Department is saying he walked onto private property, that is insane. A church invites everybody in. Have you ever seen a church with a no trespassing sign saying no journalists allowed? Have you ever seen any house of worship that says that? It is insane that they're making this stupid argument transparent.
Definitionally, it is private property, so they do have the ability to trespass anyone. But listen to the argument. Because churches are known to be welcoming, because there is a general expectation of people being allowed to walk in and join a service, they're all of a sudden not allowed to protect themselves from potential harm? This is important. Think about the precedent that creates. The group that came in to intimidate them flooded throughout the people. In one video, a guy followed a family out to their car yelling at them. They're hovering above young girls, like berating them and whatnot. If any one of these people wanted to, they could have brought a gun and they could have caused real harm. And if the precedent is that churches have to welcome everyone or not be allowed to trespass anyone, that makes them sitting ducks to anyone who does want to cause harm. I mean, grocery stores have a general expectation of allowing people in as well, but if a group comes in and starts intimidating the customers and yelling at the people shopping in the same way, they would get kicked out and the police would be brought in. No one would challenge that.
Is that Lemon says, and we will see if it is the truth, but Lemon says he was acting as a journalist. He was not participating in the protest. He was covering the protest.
That was my question.
And if that is the case, that is indeed a chilling moment here for a journalist in the United States of America doing his job as a journalist and being charged for it.
Even the affidavit quotes him as saying, "I'm just here to chronicle and report on what's happening." He also underscores at one point, I'm going to read to you from the complaint, "I'm looking at a young man who's in the corner. He's frightened, he's scared, he's crying. People are leaving church. An unknown male parishioner was observed yelling to the agitators, telling them to get out." And then he says, "I don't think they know what to do. I'm sure they probably called the local authorities right now." If I'm guessing, the authorities, the federal authorities, are relying on some of Don Lemon's own language to suggest that the protesters themselves were putting the people in the church in fear of their safety, which is how they are criminalizing this protest. But how that means Don Lemon himself is criminally liable is something that I think you, and others are going to be struggling to understand in the coming days.
Yeah, they could use his own words and all the video footage that we all watched. So again, they're trying to separate him from the protesters. I wonder if the same thing would apply if Don Lemon wasn't involved and one of the protesters was just in charge of recording the whole thing. Would they let that person off as a journalist? When she says we'll be struggling to understand how he's liable, it's kind of the same thing if a random person came up to a journalist and said, "Hey, I can give you good news footage. I'm thinking about robbing a random guy. You want to catch me in the act and have the big scoop?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that would be awesome. Let's meet up at the right location at the right time so I can record it." You could be the first one to get the story every time.
The actions of the protesters and whatever charges are brought against the protesters, whether or not they're legal, justified, protected by the First Amendment, you don't have that expectation that you are going to be also arrested and charged for being there. We have been tackled, tear gassed in this country and other countries. But when it comes to pressing charges, this is a very serious thing that the government is saying to all of us. to all of us covering protests, to all of us engaging in journalism and bringing the audience what is happening from the ground.
Biden's FBI investigated Project Veritas. I didn't see any journalists stand up for them. Also, didn't Nick Sortor get arrested in Portland for covering the protests?
And Lilia, I'll just share with you that the consequences of these two charges on the conspiracy against rights, you could have fines and or up to 10 years in prison. And the freedom of access to clinic entrances, or the FACE Act, a violation of that is a misdemeanor on your first offense with up to 6 months in prison for nonviolent obstruction. Subsequent offenses, though, can be categorized as a felony with penalties increasing up to 18 months for nonviolent offenses, up to 3 years for violent offenses. So serious potential consequences for a former CNN news anchor and independent journalist who was, as you have been doing, covering the incredible events there from the past few weeks.
No one is above the law. I mean, that's what I keep hearing. But journalists have nothing to worry about. If you don't want to get arrested, just don't commit crimes. Weird, right? Anyway, I hope they do put Don Lemon in jail, and for a meaningful amount of time. Doesn't have to be crazy, but at least enough to disincentivize the behavior. If Don Lemon gets let right off, that'll be a big win for Dems, as well as journalists will be more emboldened to do similar dumb things. And if these protesters get let out, it will send a terrible message to the types of people that want to disrupt churches. They did the crime, now they gotta be held accountable for it. As always, thanks for watching.